Hi everyone, welcome to the Spotlight video on social constructivism and Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. So previously we looked at Piaget's perspective on constructivism, or at least how he included constructivism in his theory, and he had a much more classic or personal view of what constructivism is, the idea that children have curiosity and this agency that they use as they interact in the world or in classrooms to gain knowledge, to update their schema, and to learn. And he believed that development leads learning. So we develop and our mind changes over time, therefore we can learn more in our environment. Vygotsky had a little bit of a different spin on constructivism, and we call him a social constructivist. And so he believed that, yes, it is important for children to have that agency, and they construct ideas through experience, but he believed that it had to begin on an interpersonal plane and then eventually become intrapersonal at the personal level when it becomes internalized. So it starts kind of on the social level and then becomes intrapersonal. He appreciated both developmental and environmental forces, but he definitely leaned more to the environmental ones. And he believed that learning leads development. Because we engage in social interactions and learning environments, therefore we are able to develop. So here's an interesting phenomenon. When you ask pre-service teachers to teach a skill and just say, hey, I do this in my undergraduate class, I need you to teach how to tie shoes, or teach a group of people how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or even how to make a vision board. These are the things we do in my class. I observe them and how they go about teaching it. So I don't tell them how to teach it, I just say, please teach this skill. And what is really interesting is almost every single student draws upon features or elements of Vygotsky's theory. Again, I don't tell them how to teach this, I just give them 3 to 5 minutes, and that is what I see. I see Vygotsky's theory in action. So why is this? Well, the reason it is because Vygotsky dominates classrooms, okay? His principles of learning, once it became translated in the 60s and became very popular in the United States, it transformed classrooms from more of a behaviorist approach to more of a social constructivism approach through his ideas. And so you saw much more collaboration, interaction, the social dimension of learning. And if you actually calculate how much time we spend in schools from kindergarten to 12th grade, it's anywhere from probably like 12 to 15,000 hours. Students have observed Vygotsky in all of the interactions and all of the observations they've had of their own classrooms from kindergarten to 12th grade. So therefore, over the years, they have been internalized, this is what teaching looks like. Okay, I've seen this in action, and now when I'm asked to teach, this is what I'll do. So it's interesting to keep that in mind. I'm yet to walk into a classroom in the United States and not see a large portion of the teaching that's going on through the perspective of Vygotsky. And some of his main principles were, the role of expert instructor, social interactions and socially mediated instruction, the zone of proximal development, private speech, and cultural tools. He died at a fairly early age due to tuberculosis, and so some of his actually, a lot of his theory was just in early development, but we have kind of added on and applied his work in different ways to now include reciprocal teaching and instructional scaffolding. So that was not his term that he used, but it's now been used to talk about his theory. So first of all, role of expert instructor. What Vygotsky said is that children grow into the intellectual life of those around them. So a child will have the most cognitive growth through interactions with a competent person. I think even if you consider individuals in your life or teachers who seemed more or less competent, those with greater knowledge in that area, Vygotsky would say, then you are going to be able to grow more with them because their knowledge expands further beyond yours. So examples might be, a skilled tutor, an academically driven sibling, a knowledgeable teacher, a family member who has a certain expertise. Those individuals will let you move further. It also gets at why teacher training, when we think about pre-service education, gaining that knowledge so that you will be well-versed in certain areas, because what Vygotsky would say is kind of that is the ceiling then for students. And again, other theories would not suggest that, but Vygotsky would say like kids are going to be able to grow into your level of intellect. The other thing that we know about Vygotsky is that he really emphasized social interactions, which have now been extended to thinking about cooperative and collaborative learning in the classroom. This makes sense because if I remember correctly, I think he had 8 siblings. So in his development, I mean, his life was about social interactions, and that's probably how he ended up learning a great deal. And so when you walk into a classroom that follows Vygotsky's ideas, you will see collaboration. You'll see that interpersonal element of learning where people are interacting. The way he proposed it, I think it was a little bit more of like an adult with a student, but now it has been applied to a lot more of kind of the social interactions with your peers and other competent individuals. And of course, he's probably the most well known for his concept of the zone of proximal development. And that's the idea of, if you look at this visual, that there is what a learner can do on their own, but then with support, what they can accomplish above that. So kind of that social domain, the social dimension of moving forward with, now that we say, we have labeled it as we use scaffolding to move further, but anything that could move them beyond what they're able to do on their own. But then there's also a level that he would argue that doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what supports you supply, there's going to be something that is beyond the reach of a learner at any time in their development. So the ZPD is the level of competence between what a child can do alone and what he or she or they can do with assistance. The ZPD emphasizes the social dimension. So again, children may learn on their own. So going along with what Piaget said, yeah, they can learn on their own. But what Vygotsky said is there's another layer. They can reach higher levels of cognition with help. So what scaffolding could look like then, to move into our zone of proximal development, because that's just support from outside of the learner to help move them forward. It could be assistance from an adult or another individual who is more competent than that child. Textbooks, even if you look within a textbook, even the one that we use for this course, there will be certain headings or sometimes vignettes to help you understand something. There's an organization, that's scaffolding to help you make sense of different theories. And technology, of course, we use a lot of different technology to move us beyond what we can do by ourselves. Really, scaffolding is when a task is broken down into manageable parts. So if you are working with a young child, helping them complete a puzzle that they cannot do on their own, some things you might do is help them, turn all the pieces over so that they can see the image. You might prop up the picture of the puzzle so that they can see what they're doing. You might help with what we call marking, of saying, hey, we have a section over here that there's a lot of red. Do you see any pieces that are red, right? You're helping move them beyond what they can do on their own. Now, too much scaffolding is not a good thing either, right? You provide just enough to move them forward, but if you're doing all the work, they're not learning, right? So you're providing just enough support. Let's say you need to solve a problem for the standard deviation. What are some ways in which you could scaffold this? Well, I could model a problem, working through from beginning to end with the steps. I could give you kind of a code book of like what these different symbols might mean. I could watch you do some and then give you prompts or ask you a few questions to think about what you would do next. All of that would be scaffolding. Vygotsky also said that language and private speech are important. And again, that's something that Piaget really ignored, thinking about the role of language. So this is important. And I also encourage you to think about, are you someone that talks to yourself during the day? I certainly am. Well, Vygotsky would say that's a good thing. That is actually helping us, because private speech is talking to oneself out loud, partially out loud, or silently in one's mind. And we do this with a cognitive reason. It's used as a tool to control or facilitate our thoughts and behaviors. Okay? Around the ages of like up to 3 to 4, most of it is external. If you're in a preschool or a pre-K classroom, it's a noisy place because kids are using a lot of external private speech to organize their thoughts, to think through things. An example of that up here, as you could see, like maybe they're using manipulatives or counting. Well, they're going to say things aloud as they do it, as like, okay, I need 6 buttons. And they are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They are doing that to help them focus their attention and help them sort and pull the amount that they need. Okay? By around the ages of 6 to 8, it starts to become more internal. And you might, it might be partially out loud, or it might be completely in someone's mind, but a student might be reading directions and then kind of read it over to themselves in their head. I do this all the time, especially if I'm reading something that's very dense. I'll be like, wait, what did I just read? And then I'll either read it out loud to myself or kind of read it again to myself in my head in a very purposeful way. Well, that is private speech. And again, Vygotsky would say that helps us. He also said that cultural tools are a must. And this is if you're really thinking about like socially mediated instruction or learning. But we have all these different tools that in our environment that help us learn. And cultural tools allow children to communicate, think, solve problems, and create knowledge. He said the type and quality influence patterns and rates of development. So we have real tools, things that you can actually see. But we also have a lot of symbols that are much more kind of free flowing, like language, the fact that we have words that represent items, so if I even say something like computer, that word is a symbol that recognizes an object. We also have different like signs and emblems that we use to communicate. I even think about now how much we communicate through, emojis or other symbols, as well as hand gestures, that children learn at an early age of like, we're good, thumbs up, or, if like waving someone over, like, oh, I need some help, right? We learn those pretty early on for communication, and to solve problems or to think. Now, we also have a ton of real tools. You walk into a classroom, it is full of a variety of things, from different manipulatives to even thinking about different, accessories that we have on computers, and different, materials that we use to help facilitate learning. He also was one of the first theorists to really think about historical and cultural context. And how that also can help explain what students know or are able to do at any given time. So even if you think about how might children's knowledge differ, or even our learning process differ from like the 60s to today, even thinking about the role of technology, it used to be, using technology as a source for kind of just some information that we also was maybe a little bit more vetted. You didn't have as many options. It might have been more balanced to today when you enter into the internet. One of the skills students have to learn is what's credible and what isn't. Whereas in the 60s, it was assumed if something's in print or, something's coming on in media, that there has been some due diligence there. Whereas now that's actually a skill that children need to learn to kind of distinguish what they should believe or not. So one thing that I think about a lot when it comes to Vygotsky is what he would say about standardized testing. And though much of our instruction aligns with his work when you walk into a classroom, do our assessment practices. And so I think about what would Vygotsky say about our current climate of testing? So here's an interesting question. This was a question that was on a test not too long ago, and it said, which of the following words best matches the word cup? Is it wall, saucer, table, or window? Well, if I were responding to this, I would say saucer. Okay, and that is actually what they gave a point for a correct answer. But what they found is that when they were using this test, that almost all of the children said table. And that makes sense, right? If they look at all of these, if you don't know what a saucer is, or you think it's a flying saucer, what you would think is a cup goes on a table. Right? And so that gets at kind of like the cultural impact. What surrounds children in their world is culturally, if things are changing or what you've been exposed to or not, is going to influence how you respond on tests. And so I think he would say the idea that even that you would be looking for specific answers, you have to understand that within the context of someone's cultural and historic surroundings.